Good morning.
Good morning.
How's everybody?
Good, how are you?
Good. Okay, good. That's what I like to hear. My name is Christopher Riano. I'm a professor of constitutional law and government at Columbia University.
I'm Karen Melton. I'm the Super Executive for the Second Circuit, meaning I work with the federal courts in the states of New York and Connecticut.
My name is Thomas Rizzuti. I'm an attorney at the New York City Law Department, and I represent the city lawsuits in federal and state court.
Good morning, Your Honors. My name is Tessa Nicholas, and I plan on attending New Albany.
Good morning. My name is Emily Westover, and I plan on attending Mount Holyoke College.
Good morning, Your Honors. My name is Samantha Bigness, and I plan on attending New Albany.
Good morning, Your Honors. My name is Scott Baggio, and I plan on attending New Albany.
Wonderful. And your teacher?
Is Mrs. Bader.
Good morning.
Wonderful. So we are here for Unit 1. I hope this is what everybody is prepared to do. We're going to be doing question number 1. In the democratic vision, the freedom achieved by a democratic order is above all the freedom of self-determination in making collective and binding decisions. The self-determination of citizens entitled to participate as political equals in making the laws and rules under which they will live together as citizens. What relationship, if any, does the right of self-determination have with the idea of popular sovereignty? Where in America's founding documents, acts of Congress, or decisions by the U.S. Supreme Court do you find evidence of your right to self-determination and participation as an equal in the making of rules and laws under which you will live together as citizens? What limits, if any, should be placed upon these rights? Explain your position. In order for the right to self-determination to be meaningful, what other rights must exist, and where can they be found in the fundamental documents of our political system? Explain the relationship of any rights you identify to the right of self-determination. You may begin.
Self-determination and popular sovereignty are inextricable founding principles of America. According to professor and philosopher Judith Butler, popular sovereignty has to be given by a people to itself, and this is the most important meaning of self-determination. Without equal participation in government, rights can be disregarded and power abused. Participation in government by the people is possible because of self-determination and popular sovereignty. Self-determination is when the people collectively participate in government and help guide the decisions that the government makes. Citizens cannot make decisions regarding the government if they are not given the authority to do so through a system of popular sovereignty. In essence, self-determination and popular sovereignty cannot be mutually effective if mutually exclusive. America's founding documents are rife with examples of the rights to self-determination, though equal participation in government is a work in progress. The Declaration of Independence is proclamation that governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, is the very definition of popular sovereignty.
The Constitution is framed by the ideas of self-determination and popular sovereignty, beginning with the preamble's acknowledgement that it is we the people who ordain and establish this government. Article 1 lays out the powers of the legislative branch, the representation of the views of the people. Voting rights have been broadly expanded by amendment, statute, and the courts. The 15th Amendment gave the vote to African Americans. The 17th Amendment allowed for the direct election of U.S. senators. The 19th Amendment gave women the right to vote. Supreme Court decisions against all-white primaries came in 1944 and 1953, with Smith v. Albright and Terry v. Adams, and in 1962 against favoring rural over urban voters in state legislatures, in the case Gray v. Sanders. The 24th Amendment forbid poll taxes. Then the 26th Amendment opened the vote for 18 to 21-year-olds. In Reynolds v. Sims, the Supreme Court ruled that the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment demands no less than substantially equal state legislative representation for all citizens. This standard of one person, one vote ensures that everyone is political equals. Acts of Congress also opened access to participation in government. The Indian Citizenship Act of 1924 gave Native Americans the right to vote. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 ensured voting rights of African Americans by outlawing discriminatory voting practices like literacy tests. Yet some limits still remain. In 3 states, felons cannot vote. Neither can U.S. citizens who live in U.S. territories such as the Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, and Guam.
In addition to the right of universal suffrage, the primary rights necessary to make self-determination can be found in the First Amendment. These rights are the freedom of speech, right of assembly, meaningful right of petition, right freedom of the press, and the implied right of association, as recognized by the Supreme Court and NAACP v. Alabama. The freedom of speech allows citizens to voice their opinions of the government and give the government legitimacy. The government in the United States only continues because the citizens support it. The press keeps the people informed and the government accountable to the people. Freedom of assembly and the right of association are important for a group of individuals to be able to come together and express their collective consent. Similarly, the right of petition empowers citizens to gain support for a policy change or law and gain the recognition of their elected officials. Education is also important to the idea of self-determination. Proper civic education helps encourage higher voter turnout and more participation in government. Without education and the civic knowledge that comes with it about our political system, self-determination cannot be meaningful nor effective.
Wonderful. That was very well done. But I'm kind of curious to hear a little bit more about the right of association that you discussed and the way that you discussed that in the lens of popular sovereignty. If you have the right to associate, as you described, do you not then also have the corollary right to exclude?
I would say that there is not the right to exclude people. In terms of the 14th Amendment, the Equal Protection Clause says that you cannot discriminate against specific groups of people. So I think that excluding specific people on the basis of gender or on the basis of race would violate the 14th Amendment.
What about the territories that you mentioned? What about the people in the territories? You have the United States territories, Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, Guam, Mariana Islands, and they're not allowed to vote. How does that impact the overall right to self-determination among the American peoples? They're excluded. Is it right that they're excluded? Do we need a content? Is it right that they're excluded?
I believe that the territories are slightly different, and I think that there could possibly be a constitutional amendment to allow the territories to vote if they would like to do so, but I think that is up to the people of the territories themselves.
I agree with my colleague. I believe that those territories should be included and become citizens since they are part of U.S. territory.
Also, it is up to the citizens of those territories if they want to become a full part of the United States as a state, because many of them would rather stay as a territory than become a full-fledged state. Because in Puerto Rico, they did have an election once, and it did not pass support.
But to be added as a state, doesn't Congress have to add you too? So it's not up to the people of those territories, it's actually up to Congress at the end of the day, right?
It's up to Congress. Well, first it has to be passed by that territory, and then Congress has to also allow them to become part of it.
Let me ask you a question about what you said during your opening statement about education and educated voting populace. You were indicating that educated electors or educated voters are a good thing. Should we have a threshold that voters need to have a certain level of knowledge about the system or a certain level of education in order to participate? Or is that something that is anti-democratic? What's your thoughts on that?
I believe we shouldn't exclude people or establish a threshold, because it's up to our government to educate the citizens and provide the civic education, provide the knowledge, provide the civic disposition skills such as fairness, tolerance, or objectivity, how to be informed and notice biases in media, and to have a threshold would discourage people from wanting to gain knowledge, because it might not be as easy for others based on if they were in an economically advantaged area.
So I agree with your position that an educated populace is really important, especially in the area of understanding how your government works. But throughout the United States, there are very different, you have very different educated populations in different states. So in some states, maybe New York is one, there's a real emphasis on educating students in government. We call it civics or government classes, and understanding how your government works. But what about those states throughout the country where there isn't that much of an emphasis and they're not teaching civics or education? Should there be a requirement that every school system throughout the United States should educate their students to a certain to a certain level, so that when you leave, say, high school, you know, everyone has a certain understanding about their government. And how does that go back to your positions on the right of self-determination and popular sovereignty?
While I believe that states should emphasize education because it is important for the populace to be educated because they're both the governed and the governors, I think that it is up to the individual states because that is not a specific right in the Constitution given to the federal government. So while I believe states should educate students, like in New York State, there's a requirement that 12th graders take government class, which I think is very good. I think it would be excluding a lot of voters if the national government were to say that every state has to have the same level of education.
I agree with my colleague. I don't think that, I think that it's a state's right. So, for example, in Epperson v. Alabama, you could not force the creation sciences in school because every person had different, not every person, but different places had different beliefs. So based on where you live and what kind of education you have, it may vary.
I just want to clarify for my colleague, the case was Epperson v. Arkansas.
I mean, but how do we draw that balance? That's not an easy balance to draw.
What about the 14th Amendment?
Yeah.
Doesn't the 14th Amendment says that you have to have equal rights among the states. So why can't education be one of those equal rights among the states? If you go back to we the people, it's saying we the people form the government. So how can you have a democratic government if we the people is completely uneducated about their operation of government? Doesn't that lead to corruption and other issues?
As I said before, I think that education is up to the states because it is not something directly given to the national government, and I don't think that the varying levels of education is necessarily inherently discriminatory that would connect it to the 14th.
Because since the United States is so drastically different across all the different states, establishing if we establish one solid system that would apply to every citizen, it would never work for every citizen because we're so diverse and we are a melting pot and we are a mosaic.
I know your time's up, but I just want to ask one very brief question. What if a state decides to completely cancel their education program? Is there anything under your theory that the government, anything that can hold that state accountable to resurrect their education program under what you guys have said?
I do think that education is important, and eliminating education entirely would not be serving the people. In the preamble, it says, we the people form a more perfect union, and I think that would not go with the goal in the preamble to form a more perfect union by stopping education.
Yes, but do the states have the right to completely eradicate their educational requirements and say we're just not going to do it? Under what theory or what part of the Constitution could the federal government say to the state, you can't do that? Is it a violation of the Constitution to eviscerate, to get rid of your educational program?
How about this? Since we're out of time, yes or no?
Yeah. Word.
I say no.
No.
Okay.
All right.
Well done.
Okay, read. Like, you all look like you're about to pass out. So I realize we have to come in here looking scary, but I promise we're actually not all that scary. And at the end of the day, yes, you agree. I meant that when I said that. Unit 1 is not the easy unit, right? Everybody wants Unit 6. Sorry, Unit 6. But I think at the end of the day, what you have here and what you've done here is quite incredible because Unit 1 forms the basis, right? If you can't understand this question about democratic vision and understand fundamental balances between Article 1, Section 8, as you can reference it, right? And federal and state, and then how does that translate within this 14th Amendment rubric that we brought up? You have a failure to understand all the rest of how everything functions, right? You all worked very, very well together. not just at the beginning, but you could tell that because you came out of the gate guns blazing, and good for you, all we're gonna do is then come out of the gate guns blazing too with hard questions, right? So that's the balance of when you're good, we're gonna be good too. And I thought that you all did an incredible job. You answered really tough questions. I had a whole list of things I was ready to go on. It's the reason I opened up with the corollary issue of if we can associate, then we cannot associate, right? So you have things like Dale versus Boy Scouts of America. There's been some really interesting cases on that, but you did a great job. You should be very, very proud of yourselves.
Yeah, really well done. I thought, you really listened to each other, and I thought it was great how you really just seamlessly went back and forth. And also, some of the questions, as Professor Rand said, we asked some more questions and you were never thrown off your game. So good for you guys, and best of luck in the next round. Well done.
Yeah, I think I agree completely with what everybody else said, and I think the fact that at the end I was asking some kind of confrontational questions, and it seems like it was like, when you get questions like that, it's a good thing, I think.
Right. It's better for a hotbed. You don't want to speak.
Yeah. And when I ask a question that's, and the question that I posed was kind of like a ridiculous question, like could a state decide to completely get rid of their education? And
It's actually not so good.
I understand. But so it might seem like a ridiculous question, and the way that your argument was phrased is that you think that that should be a state right issue.
Yeah.
Just because you think your answer, like my question is, can they completely get rid of education? Under your argument, it's okay for you to say, yes, I think the state should be able to do that. That doesn't mean that you
Right.
personally actually
Right,
believe it.
exactly.
That's what you're arguing.
Right.
And so you can argue these things to us. And so when you add, and like when Mr. Riano asked you, it's a yes or no question, it's okay for you to say the controversial thing here. Like we're
Right.
arguing
Yeah.
kind of a moot thing. So I think you guys handled that very well. So good job.
And you did well. You had the hard judges, so good work.
Yeah.